What's up, guys? Welcome to the channel. Andre here. When you were a kid, did you ever play telephone in school? And you'd start with something like Christmas tree and you'd end up with like dog ate my homework. It's such a great example of the way that messages can change based on who's repeating it and how it's being translated. So in today's video, I wanted to look at 3 epic mistranslations in history and see what there is to learn. First up, I wanted to look at how a single word can change the meaning of an entire philosophy.
All life is suffering. All suffering arises from craving.
And this idea that suffering is all around us is central to Buddhist philosophy. In fact, it's noble truth number 1 in the Buddhist Four Noble Truths. And this is where mistranslation number 1 comes in, because in Buddhism, most of the documentation is written in Sanskrit. And in Sanskrit, the word for suffering is dukkha. But dukkha does not mean suffering in the way that you would normally use the word in English. In fact, it kind of covers a whole spectrum of different levels of discomfort. And when Buddhists say there's suffering all around you, yeah, okay, that's true, because at any given time, you're probably experiencing some level of discomfort. Maybe it's a neck cramp, or you stubbed your toe on something, or your power's out, or whatever the problem happens to be. And so to illustrate this, I think a really good example in English is the dreaded word, the thing you never want to hear when you ask someone how they're doing. Oh yeah, I'm fine, no big deal. Yeah, I'm fine, okay? I'm fine. No, I'm fine, really, I'm fine. It's just, yeah, no, it's fine. If you ask somebody how they are and they say they're fine, especially if it's in a text message or an email, you really have no idea. You need context clues to illustrate what exactly that means. Are they mad at you? Are they trying to avoid something? Or are they legitimately just kind of, getting along? They're just going along, they're fine. Any of these things are possible. And so in much the same way, the idea of dukkha, meaning suffering, can cast a light on Buddhism that makes people think it is super bleak. Like French existentialist film Bleak. All of life is suffering. So finally, just like in that game of telephone we talked about at the beginning of the video, incremental changes in language, incremental shifts in the way that we perceive the word suffering will fundamentally change people's perspectives on an entire school of thought, on an entire type of philosophy. Now imagine if someone came to you and instead of saying, life is suffering, they were like, hey, there's this thing here that can maybe help you have a slightly better day. To steal Dan Harris's phrase, help you be 10% happier. You'd probably be a lot more likely to hear them out, because you're not thinking, oh my God, this is like some doom and gloom, end of the world, all life is suffering and therefore you will never be happy type situation. But bad translations don't just change our perspectives on some theoretical construct, on some sort of intellectual level. They have real lasting implications for real human beings.
Anti-Semitism in the 20th century hasn't been limited to Nazi Germany, however.
And to illustrate this, let's take a look at the life of Jerome of Sidon, who was a priest tasked with helping to translate the Bible from Hebrew to Latin. Now, in Exodus chapter 34, Moses comes down with the commandments. And depending on whose version of the Bible you read, either his face and head are basked in sort of like a celestial light, they're like shining with the light of the Lord, or he comes down and he's got horns. Like horns. Yeah, like that. At the time, Jerome, our translator, thought this was a great thing. He thought it was a glorification of Moses, and he went so far as to say as much in other publications. It all comes down to the way that Hebrew handles vowels, because it doesn't have any. Instead, the consonants get dots and bars attached to them called nikud, and these indicate pronunciation. So it's easy to see how the word Quran, which means to emit rays, could be misconstrued or mistaken for the word Keren, which means to have horns. But over time, the horns were being depicted in more and more nefarious ways, and these illustrations were used to depict Jewish people as evil because they had horns, like the devil. Eventually, this led to things like hooves and tails and other satanic evil imagery, all designed to try to make this group of people separate, less than, other, so that they could have all sorts of horrors visited upon them. Looking back, there's a lot of academic skepticism as to whether or not this was done on purpose, whether Jerome of Sidon was purposefully trying to depict Moses, a Jewish person, as some kind of horned villain, or if it was a legitimate translation choice because of the way that the language is handled. Now, for the purpose of this video, let's, as a thought experiment at least, just take a moment and give Jerome the benefit of the doubt. Let's say that he looked at this and said, horns are the way to be, you guys. Like, you're not anybody unless you have horns. Let's say that was his perspective. Okay, great. What does this teach us about how to handle translations over the course of a 1500-year period? Well, it seems pretty clear to me that because so much of translation is related to context and the nuance of the way that language is used to convey ideas and the connotation of those ideas, that the specific word choices might have to evolve over time. Maybe, like big M maybe, having horns was something people aspired to 1500 years ago. Maybe, it's possible. I wasn't there, I don't know. And so in that way, it becomes appropriate to recognize that translations are less one-to-one correspondences from one word to another, but rather a way to convey sentiment, intent, and context. And so updating these things becomes very, very appropriate. Speaking of context, let's lighten things up a little bit and take a look at a case study from every Marketing 101 textbook that's ever been published.
Chevrolet made it happen, introducing Chevy No Va.
In 1962, Chevy introduced the Nova as a solid, reliable car. Over the years, it evolved in body type and specifications, but it generally sold pretty well. As the story goes, Chevy did not take into account the way that the word Nova could be read by Spanish-speaking customers, specifically as no va, or doesn't go. Business school textbooks love to reference this example as the primary case study in understanding how your product will be viewed by your customer. If you're selling something internationally, you may need to rebrand, just like Chevy did when they sold the Nova in Canada as the Pontiac Acadian. There's only one problem with this case study, and it's that it never happened. Because the Nova sold fine in Spanish-speaking countries, because the word Nova and the words no va are different ideas. They're completely different things. Imagine saying to someone, you can't sell carpet because people might think you were selling a pet. Obviously, that mistake would never be made. Just like it wasn't made in Spanish-speaking countries where the Nova sold just fine. So unfortunately, the very textbooks that are trying to teach students how to be aware of cultural nuances and sensitivities are themselves missing the boat on a cultural element of language, which is nuance and context. And as we saw with Jerome of Sidon, this can go really, really badly, or in the case of the Chevy Nova, be somewhat benign. But because it is such an amusing depiction of a mistranslation that never occurred, it comes in at number 3.
Language is a means or a vehicle for communicating thoughts and ideas.
It's more important than ever that we be aware of the way that language is deployed to convey sentiment, nuance, and context. Because so much of the systems that we use to consume media today are driven by algorithms that rely on increasingly inflammatory language. Something that could be an annoyance today and an irritant tomorrow could be public enemy number 1 a week or a month from now. And that's because language can evolve so quickly in a 24/7 connectivity cycle using these guys. Now, I'm not saying anything that hasn't been covered in documentaries and news stories and all sorts of different areas. The point has to be to look backwards, to see the way that these things have influenced society up to now, so that we can understand the way that they might influence society tomorrow, a month, a year, or a decade from now. Subtle changes in language cause evolutions in sentiment over time, and those can either be constructive or destructive. It's our responsibility to be vigilant and make sure we aren't going down the wrong path. Alright guys, that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, hit the like button. That is what it's there for. And if you want to follow along for more videos, hit the subscribe button, because that is also what it's there for. But that's it for today. So as always, you will see me in the next video.